On today's episode of Hungry for Wisdom, so sorry we skipped a week. I couldn't talk, and the world was a far better place for 8 sweet days, according to everybody else. When a Christian uses the term family planning, we should be meaning that we plan to have a big family. And check out what we did to our theme song. It's episode 57. Turn it up! Did you hear that?
This theme song brought to you by Hyperactive Gerbils.
Like, I've never been into energy drinks, but if I was. So basically what we did, and this brings me to the dedication for this episode, because this episode is dedicated to our boy Bernie. Bernie! Shout out, B-Dog, because he apparently has all sorts of personality disorders and listens to our show on 1.5 times speed. He does. He's like, yeah, I speed it up so I can get through it faster and absorb more content. And I'm like, how? Like, I get the question, if we record this thing on 1.5 times speed, like, people listen to this show and they look at their phone to make sure it's only on 1 time speed because we go so fast. He speeds it up to 1.5.
He processes information like a boss.
Yeah, he's the man, and it terrifies me. So anyway, he was like, so guys, this is what I do, but check out what happens to your theme song when I do it on 1.5 speed. So he played it for us on a Sunday morning, and me and Ben were just like, oh, yes. So anyway, Paul Nims made that theme song for us because he's the mad scientist and was in the lab, and then Bernie just lit a fire under its butt, gave it a fifth of liquor, and said, go. So Bernie, to you I say, listen to the squeal too. It's like a guitar whose voice is cracking in puberty or something.
I wonder if, like, I don't even know if Paul would Paul be able to do this at like a 1.5 times speed? And just
sure. No, this
is that squeal and everything.
Yeah.
Like his fingers wouldn't be bleeding or anything like that.
No, he's a pro.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
I couldn't do that. So Paul, you're awesome.
I didn't tell Paul, by the way, that we were jacking with the theme song that he made, because when you make music, this is just hitting me right now. When you make music, it's art. This is your baby. I should have called him and asked for permission to screw with it in post production, and I didn't ask him to. So, Paul, we love you.
Yes.
We beg your forgiveness.
Yes.
While having neglected to ask your permission. So,
yes.
All right. So, guys, please know that if you do anything for the Hungry for Wisdom podcast, you are ceding over control to the two of us, and that may not be a great idea. So write in your questions, and we will make up a name for you, and it might be mildly insulting, and it'll be fun. We do have some fun questions today.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. About family and such issues. So before we get into that, though, let's give all of these families some wisdom. Come on now. Proverbs 4:10, only one verse today. Proverbs 10 says... Just kidding, it doesn't say that. I tried to speed that one up to 1.5 times also. It sounded weird, man. It was like a rave, but just wrong. Like most raves are, I guess. So I said it wrong. Proverbs 4, verse 10. It says this: hear my son and accept my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. All right, how many people do you know? Actually, this is going to take a dark turn for a second. Sorry, guys. Need to warn you. How many people do you know that have died doing stuff that their parents told them not to do? Right? Ooh. It's a sad thing to think about, but it's pretty common, isn't it? So, like, most of us don't get through middle school without losing a friend to something preventable, let alone high school and college and all that. And then everything from, a fatal car accident while joyriding to drug overdoses to suicides. And, I had one, like a broken neck while jumping off a bridge. That was a hard deal. Picking fights with the wrong people. And then, you wind up at the wrong part of town and mouthing off a little bit, and you get a little cocky, and then all of a sudden, like, it's just over, So that kind of stuff happens all the time. And if you die doing something that your parents told you not to do, that is confirmation that a parent's wisdom is life-giving wisdom, because it would have saved a life in that instance. So it's life-giving, life-sustaining, maybe a better way to put it. But Solomon here is basically begging his son to listen to him rather than die. He's like, those are your only two options a lot of times, right? You either follow your parents' advice or you do something that may well wind up in death. And it's been this way since the Garden of Eden. God's like, all right, Adam, Eve, there's only one rule here. Don't die. And if you follow this rule, you won't die. And we all know how that panned out. They did not follow the rule, and it led to death in the immediate sense, spiritually, and in the long-term sense, biologically. And so the way that Solomon says verse 10, Proverbs 4:10, it's a direct callback to the commands to listen to Israel. So some of you have heard of the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, which is kind of the primary confession of Israel. Shema Israel, which means hear, O Israel, or listen, Israel. So Solomon in Proverbs 4:10 says it similarly. He says, Shema beni, which means hear, O my son. Now, in the Jewish mind, if you start out a saying with Shema, that's a clear reference, right? It reminds them of Deuteronomy 6. Shema Yisrael, what is it? Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, right? So it means, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord, he is one. This is the primary confession of the old covenant people of God. The central confession for them. Like this was their John 3:16. Right? This was the verse that they would rally around more than any other. And Solomon brings down that kind of seriousness to beg his son to listen to him. He invokes that. These are the big guns he's bringing out. So parents know how fragile life is. And that's why Solomon is getting so serious on us all of a sudden, is because parents know. We've seen some stuff. We know that, life, over the course of many years, we've seen how precious life is and how fragile it is and how a long life is more rare than we would like. Because look, there are a lot of things that can take you out other than doing stupid stuff that your parents don't approve of, right? Like how many people have died in car accidents or at work or on the road or something when it wasn't their fault at all? There are diseases that can get you. This world is a dangerous place. And that danger is better understood by the older generations because they've seen it. And so this is why we need advice from our fathers and why we need to listen. Young people, please listen to me right now. Listen to your parents. They know stuff that they know rules that are written in blood that we haven't seen yet because we're not old enough to have seen the blood be spilled. Proverbs 22:28 says this, do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have set. Because Papa probably knew something that you don't know, and that's why he put a fence there, right? So here's an example. I was reading a commentary on Exodus that was written by a Jewish guy, Jewish teacher, Dennis Prager. He's not a Christian, heck of a commentator, though, from other perspectives other than Christian perspectives on the Torah, the Old Testament, things like that. He made an interesting point in his commentary on Exodus. He said that when Moses went to Pharaoh the first time, the elders of Israel went with him. And then later on, the elders didn't go with him. Why not? And he was speculating on this. And he made the point that life is so precious that the elders knew, now granted, Moses was like 80 at this point, but there were even elders that were older than him. They knew that life was hanging in the balance and that it was fragile and precious. And so they didn't push the line. And they in other words, they didn't risk it, right? Because they knew how precious life was. And so about a year after I read that, my father-in-law and I, we were talking about life and whatever. He's an old special forces guy, right? So he's jumped out of all kinds of flying machines. He's just got cool stories. He's done super cool stuff. And he said to me, I can't even imagine now doing the stuff that I used to do. He said, I must have been nuts. They did one thing for like an exhibition where they rappelled down from the ceiling of the Kingdom, the football stadium in Seattle. And he's like, I can't imagine doing that now. That's insane, right? But it's what seems now to him like a manifestly bad idea. At the time, as a young man, he didn't think twice about it. He was like, yeah, cool, let's do it, no problem. And so the author of the Exodus commentary, Dennis Prager, he was making the same point that we need young guys to take these risks, but we need the old guys to tell them that life is fragile and precious and don't take unnecessary risks. And we need to value both of these things in society, right? Because life is too short and it ends too easily. But if we can listen to our forefathers, it doesn't need to end needlessly. So thank God, by the way, for cross-generational wisdom. And, thank you, Solomon, for taking the time to instruct us in all of this. Here I go again talking to dead people. I shouldn't thank Solomon. It's paganism to talk to dead people.
We can thank the Lord for Solomon.
Thank the Lord
giving Solomon that wisdom.
For Solomon. There you go.
There we go.
So, metaphorical high five across the great chasm to posthumous Solomon.
Maybe you can look forward to that one day where you can give him a high five.
An anticipatory thank you to Solomon.
There we go.
I like it. Okay, there's some eschatology for you. Now, speaking of wisdom across generations, was that an old joke? I'm sorry. No, actually, we are not of different generations. You are almost exactly 10 years older than me.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got more wisdom piled up than I have, and you don't need to agree to that because I know you're too humble to do so. But I have no problem saying it, which is why one of the many reasons why I love bringing you in on this stuff. So we've got some. We got some thises and that's on a specific subject today.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll just say wisdom born of scars and blood.
Yeah. Which is different than the water and the blood from 1 John, right?
Certainly.
That's from above. This stuff is just earthly grit.
Self-inflicted scars oftentimes.
Yeah. So our questions today, what I did was I went through and pulled the 3 of the questions that have to do with family life. By the way, parents, if you're listening to this with your kids, we're going to get into some issues of what is now called family planning, right? It's a sticky term, I think. It needs some definition, but, contraception, that kind of thing. So, be careful who is tuning into this part. We're going there.
Yeah. So, first question then. It comes from a guy who is broke, but is in the mood. Are Christians allowed...
The mood for what, Ben?
He's in the mood for loving.
He's in the mood for loving.
Yes. All right. So the
You're
question
so prim and proper. I love you, man.
I am. Sorry. You are quickly breaking me of that. Much to the humor of my children. Okay. Are Christians allowed to use birth control or get vasectomies, have tubes tied, etc.? We don't want to disobey God, but seriously, bro, I cannot afford more kids.
It's a legit point.
It's a good...
Yeah. I ain't got no money, but I got a wife and the urge to merge. What do I do? All right. So there's kind of 2 questions there, honestly. And I don't think this was intended as 2 questions, but I'm going to break it up into 2 because...
I think so.
Yeah, one is the contraception thing.
Yeah.
And, either sub-questions, temporary contraception or permanent, right? With vasectomies and surgical stuff and whatever. Yeah. The second question is, should you not have more kids because you don't have more money? There's something to bat around also. Let's take that first one first. Birth control. What are you thinking? You're saying something?
Well, I was going to say, even in discussing birth control, I mean, there's a number of different means for that, right? Some are, for example, more abortive. And some are...
Can you define that for them?
So in other words, like, for example, they might not prevent, for example, some birth control can prevent ovulation, or others can prevent the implantation of a fertilized egg, which would basically be a, the essential, it's essentially the new, whatever they call it, RD, I remember it was called RD80, RDU80 or whatever, but it was that.
RU486.
Yeah, that one. It's essentially preventing prevented the fertilized egg from implanting into the uterine wall.
Yeah, it's an abortion before you know you're pregnant.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's they call that Plan B or whatever. It's like, oh man, okay. So kids have turned all this off now. Okay. Oh man, I had sex last night and I don't know, if I'm going to wind up pregnant because I wasn't careful or this or that, and so I'm going to go take this Plan B pill. And basically, if there is a life that has been started, if there is a conception that has happened, it'll just clear it out. And that's that is an abortive. I mean, in Christian categories, that's that is the definition of the 6th commandment, right? That is taking a life. So that is a murderous form of birth control. Now, I need to say, as I say that, there are people listening who have done that, right? And so has a murder been committed there? Yes. Does the grace of God apply to murderers? Yes. Yeah. So there's something to repent of here, but there's also grace to believe in and a savior to save you from this. And he has not cast you off because, you've done this horrible thing. We've all done horrible things. Turn to Christ and say, I agree and I believe, save me.
I think that's incredibly important because when we talk about areas where there has been sin committed, right? We don't want to stand up and say, I'm higher than thou, right? We're all, ain't none of us pure before the cross. And to be able to speak truly about these things, right? I was an offender, and yet Christ saved me.
While I was
right?
an enemy of, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So some of these methods of birth control, as you rightly called them, medical terminology, these are abortive, they would say. And we're saying it's killing in a fertilized egg. It's killing a life that God has begun.
Yeah.
These abortive methods of birth control are not allowed by God.
Yeah.
The answer is no.
Yeah, and I'm pretty confident that there's a number of couples, maybe even that this may be brand new news to them, right? And so, binding your conscience or anything, it's like, look, if you were not aware, it's like, well, now you are. Let's move in a different direction.
Yeah. First off, please, in the name of all that is good and holy, don't ever do that again. And then if your conscience is weighed down by like, oh no, I committed murder and didn't realize it, then we'll walk you through the gospel. There is no judgment or condemnation here. We've been released from sins that are equally as bad. So come and talk to us and we'll show you the grace that we found.
Precisely.
All right. So that's the abortive stuff.
Yeah.
Other methods of birth control.
Other methods of birth control, for example, that prevent ovulation or things like that, right?
You're talking about chemical stuff.
Chemical stuff, right? Or even, you've got the rhythm method, right? Where there's certain weeks that you avoid.
Yep.
For whatever reason, right? Which,
honey, I'm in the mood. Cold. You're in the mood for a cold shower. That's what you.
You're in the mood for a cold shower because our checkbook has a zero balance.
But we can't afford the water bill.
Yeah. So there's that, and
biblically allowable. I don't think we've ever discussed this.
I don't think so either. I mean, off the dome, I can't. I can't think of like I can't think of a portion of scripture that would say that is wrong.
Okay.
Maybe with the exception of Onan, but specifically when Onan, who was he was Judah's son, and he was commanded to provide an heir for his sister-in-law because Onan's brother died.
Yeah, so he was supposed to get his sister-in-law pregnant so that she could have a progeny and kids to take care of her when she got old. It was a law out of like Deuteronomy 25, for example. It was called levirate marriage.
Yes.
And it seems weird to us that you'd have to sleep with your sister-in-law,
Yeah.
but that was the Social Security program, was your children, right?
Yes.
Family had to take care of, and so a woman who has lost her husband needs security for the future, so it was the brother's job to give it to her.
Yeah. So the question was when So with Onan, then he would fulfill the quote deed, but then would the scriptures say he pulled out
spilled
and
his seed on the ground. Yeah,
right?
so Genesis 38 is where this is. Oddly enough, I read a blog one time about like horror stories from preachers. I was a brand new pastor. I was preaching through Genesis, and it was like, hey, don't preach Genesis 38 on Mother's Day. It was like an example of like, ha ha ha, right? Like, because we just walk through the Bible verse by verse, and it's like, look, sometimes your method has to give way, right? I kid you not. It was like the next Mother's Day or the one afterwards. I was preaching through Genesis 38 pops up, and it would have been my text on Mother's Day. And I was like, lesson learned. The method can bend. I can just picture everybody's mom and grandma, and they're just clutching pearls, being like,
fair enough.
What is this guy talking about? Okay, so
but the problem is that what was the real reason? What was the reason that God struck Onan dead?
It wasn't because he practiced a form of birth control.
No.
It was because he broke a law.
He broke a law, and honestly, if I'm doing the math right, he would have been the one to directly benefit from the law having been broken.
Oh shoot, yeah.
So this was like, he's doing something maybe ostensibly which was enjoyable to him, but he was also not going to. But he's benefiting from the ruination of I think it's Tamar, right?
I don't think that was Tamar. Was that Tamar? I don't know. I don't remember. But but think about it from the sister's point of view, and I don't want to get too graphic here, but I'm going to for a second. It's like, this is an uncomfortable situation for her too.
Certainly.
And now she's got to engage in this sexual act for the sake of her future. Yeah. And because of Onan's selfishness, it winds up being pointless. So she just had to engage in an act she probably didn't feel like engaging in, and doesn't even get the benefit from. Like, no wonder God struck him dead.
Yeah. So in all of that, when we think of that, what was on? Was it birth control that Onan was being disciplined for? No.
I've also heard that verse used to scare
young
people
men
out of masturbation.
Yes.
Right? Like, oh, you spill your seed on the ground, God's got a lightning bolt with your name on it. It's like, can we deal with some context here?
Yeah, and certainly there are far better ways to address address that with
The
even young
masturbation
men.
issue?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just, like, that's a reach, man. Like, you got the whole Bible and you land there?
Yeah,
Seriously? Anyway.
exactly.
So that was not a biblically prohibited form of birth control. It's biblically prohibited to disobey God.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
So I'm trying to think of any other places where the scripture is saying, hey, no, you should not ever restrict, the conception of children.
Yeah, well, and this is why, and we haven't even gotten into, we've done the chemical side of things, but we haven't gotten into barrier protection and things like that as far as contraception, prophylactics and stuff. But like the basic reason that this is a debate is because there's not a definitive black and white verse on it, right?
Yeah.
And so then you're arguing from positions of philosophical approaches and presuppositions. Yeah. So the two sides basically sound like this. One side says, God is the author of life, and if you claim a decision-making role there, you're claiming to be God. It's not our decision. We need to laissez-faire this thing, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. And by the way, I think that's a biblically faithful case to make, right? You can, in good conscience, with a Bible in your hand, make that case without violating any passage in the Bible. Mm-hmm. The other side is, okay, I'll get metaphorical about it. Adam has a garden that he has to tend and take care of. And he's got decisions to make about how he's going to do that. And for example, if it's putting his wife at danger to have kids or more kids or whatever, and he's risking the life of his bride, then he's actually, he's making a decision there, taking on a risk that, how do I say this? Taking on a risk of losing something that he's supposed to protect.
Yes.
And so that becomes a legitimate debate in his head. How do I best take care of my wife? Is it by protecting her life, or is it by just trusting God doing, and building a family if he so chooses?
And I think that boils down to really a heart issue, right? When it comes to this, right? So for example, where I might counsel someone if they're saying, well, we don't want to have any kids because we want to have fun and just run around, right?
Yeah.
So we want to enjoy life, go out on the weekends.
We want to travel.
We want to travel. We want to see. You can couch it in whatever terms, but honestly, if you really boil that down, I would say you may have an issue with selfishness.
Yeah, that's what that is.
So to say, well, we want birth control for that reason. Okay, we should be talking about heart issues. Right?
The issue isn't birth control.
The issue isn't birth control.
Yeah.
In the same idea, well, we, like for example, the nature of the question, we can't afford to have, 12 or 18 or 15 kids or something like that. And, there might be some wisdom there, to evaluate. Mm-hmm. And if that causes you to evaluate your own, to use the term family planning, then okay, I can understand that. I know that there would be people that would be on other sides of that issue. For example, do you trust God to provide, right?
Yeah.
And so do you, you look at families back in the day, they were big, and that's fine. And they were provided for. Now, did they all have Xboxes and PS5s and everything like that? No, maybe our standards for provision are different, and maybe they need to be adjusted, and maybe they will get adjusted. In the coming days, who knows? But I think that it's not bad to have wisdom and to go, can I really afford that? Can we really afford this? Okay. Now, that shouldn't be the limiting factor, but I think it's something to be wise and to think about. Yeah.
I'm not going to disagree with what you just said, but I'm going to go somewhere a little bit different with it.
Certainly.
Okay?
Go for it.
So I'm going to start from the standpoint of children are good, and which of course everybody there's no argument there. Well, maybe there are for some people. They're dead wrong. They're dumb. Children are good. Children are a blessing from the Lord, and whatever it is that we sacrifice in order to cause a child's life to exist and flourish, it'll be worth it, right? So we start from the standpoint of, should I have more kids? Yes. That's my baseline answer. Yes. That's the model, that's the plan, and that's the biblical norm. Now, are there reasons to deviate from the plan? Is this a law for everybody? Well, some people can't have kids. There's an exception that's forced on you right there. Now we start talking about adoption, we start talking about this and that, right? Mm-hmm. But the norm is have as many kids as you possibly can, because God didn't write birth control into the created order. Since it has been given to us as an option in the time in which we live. It's like a lot of other things that have been given to us as options in the time in which we live, such as refrigerators. It's not a it's not a moral evil. It is an option there to be faithfully stewarded and navigated within biblical principles and boundaries. But if we get to the point where we start thinking about other things as more important than kids, now we've got an idolatry problem. And that's my hesitation on this question is I can't afford to have more kids. The two answers to that I think need to now. So I agree with you, Ben, that that's a factor to consider, right? Because kids there are practical considerations. Having kids takes money. Okay, fine. I don't have the money for it. Fine. That should cause us to pause and reevaluate our approach to things. I don't think, and guys, listen, this is one guy talking. This is not me quoting Bible, so you take this with a grain of salt. I do not believe that not having enough money is a reason to not have children, because we have promises from God in Matthew 6 and 7 that he will provide. We have been given the power to do the job to which he has called us. And if he creates a life, that's him creating that life. He decided that child would be born. Whatever decisions we made leading up to it, the ultimate decision to create a life was his, and he entrusted that to these parents. And there's no biblical scenario where he pulls the rug out and says, never mind, you're going to starve to death because you had too many kids. So I do think that it's a valid thing. I don't think it's shutting your brain off and having blind faith to say, look, just trust God, it'll work out. I would say it more like this: have the kids, trust God, it'll work out, and work your butt off wisely and make whatever changes you need to make, whether it's reducing expenses, increasing income, all of those things, those strategic life decisions, to have the kids. And one of my personal experiences here that has confirmed this theology for me, I don't want to appeal to this as the final trump card of it, but it's something worth saying. As pastors, we sit next to a lot of people as they're dying, and we hear a lot of people's last words, right? And I've never heard anybody say they wish they had fewer kids.
Yeah.
But I've heard plenty of regrets about the things that they chose over their family and over more kids. And I've heard a lot of people say, I wish I had a bigger family, more kids, more grandkids, whatever. I invested in my career. I invested in, travel is a big one. I wanted to travel, so I didn't have a bunch of kids. And particularly I shouldn't even say that. I was going to say particularly for women. When women choose their career over having a lot of kids, the regrets that happen there are pretty horrendous. Because by the time you have the regrets, it's too late to have more kids.
Yeah.
Men choose their career over providing for the kids that they have usually, right? They're gone all the time providing because they think their only job is to put food on the table, and they miss the actual parenting aspects of it. So there's regrets all the way around here. Is it possible to have too many kids? I think not. I think it's possible to have too many kids for your lifestyle and then not change your lifestyle accordingly.
Yeah.
I think that's common. Am I saying anything here that you think is out over my skis? These are my opinions on the matter. Feel free to push.
No, I don't necessarily think it's out over your skis. I think that, again, we have to apply wisdom to this. Here's something else I thought about wisdom-wise, right? Okay, so I'm just thinking pure numbers, right? A lot of countries now are going through phases where they are going through population decline.
All of the Western countries and half of the Eastern ones.
Yeah, in fact, they're even seeing that now in China. Right? Because
oh my gosh, no, China is the example. It's China and Italy that are the example. Well, and the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, and you look at some of these European countries. It's like they're saying, in 50 to 100 years, they'll say, "Will the last European please turn out the lights?" Mm-hmm. It's
Russia.
It's actually very scary.
Yep.
And so from a standard, I'm a human being, and I want to see the flourishing of my city and my nation. Please have children.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the church, Christians, have children. This, by the way, is the best method of evangelism. Not because it's the cheapest and not because it's the most efficient, but just on the efficiency end of things. If you look at not every child born in a Christian home ends up a Christian, obviously, right? People have decisions that they have to make. But if you look at converts per gospel presentation, when you're out sharing the gospel with people you don't know, versus converts per child in a Christian home, it's not even close.
Or just think about this. If you want to change a culture, start by changing a worldview. Why don't you have so many kids that you can influence their worldview for the cause of the gospel? Let's teach them reality versus whatever they're being taught in. Yeah. I won't go into my rant on other systems of education. However,
nice self-control, Ben.
Yeah, I was
Good
working
job.
on
Way
that.
to stay on
All right.
topic.
So when it comes to it, yes, disobedience to God, that really comes, is this disobedience to God? It really comes, it's a hard issue. But also, how about maybe looking at your attitude towards children? Are they a burden? Look, children require work. Everything requires work. Okay,
Not having children requires
not
work.
having children requires
Especially
work.
when you hit 70 and you need help.
Oh gosh, you know how many? I mean, how many people do we know that like either their children are super far away and their only recourse is to be put into like a home where nobody visits them or anything like that. That just goes completely against the family.
It really is a psychosis of the Western world.
Yeah,
You know that we don't have enough children in general, and then the children that we do have, percentage wise, are much more likely to not fulfill their duty to their parents. It's a very sad thing.
yeah, and so don't discount the joy that you might be missing out on. Right? This is God's gift. All of my kids, all three of them, even for I've got two teenagers right now, and yes, teenage boys are wonderful. They also are headstrong, and there's a lot of work that runs into it. But I would not trade that, boys. If you're ever listening to this podcast, I would not trade you for anything.
And your boys are particularly, I think, are pretty stinking cool.
They are.
The amount of joy that they bring into a room with them is not small, right?
Yeah.
And so like okay, another personal testimony here. I graduated high school in 2005. Okay. A lot of my friends, particularly the guys, were like, I'm not going to have kids. I'm going to do me. I got this career thing. I got whatever, I'm not going to have kids. Now I got 6 kids, 7.5 years between the oldest and the youngest. And so for the last, number of years, they've been looking at me like I'm insane. And they're just like, dude, that's exhausting and it's expensive. And look what you could be doing with all of that money. Plus I'm a pastor, so I'm never going to be rich. You know what I mean?
But let me push on that a little bit. You as a pastor, again, pastor's not paid super awesome. Guess what? God has provided for your kids.
That's exactly. I'm living proof of this.
Absolutely.
And there have been times where I felt like I'm making over 6 figures a year because I needed to replace my roof. The church showed up and did what the church do.
Yeah.
And we got my roof done for pennies on the dollar, right? And that kind of stuff is normal in the church, but especially I think for pastors because we got higher visibility.
Yeah.
And you just got to make sure that we're taken care of. But that's one way that he's provided for us.
Yeah.
We have, and my wife is a stay-at-home mom. How did we pull that off in a 2-income world? Well, God is faithful. And my wife's a genius. She knows how to stretch a buck.
She is. And can cook amazing bread.
Oh, the sourdough.
Oh, dude.
We need to cut this episode short. I'm going home.
Okay.
But yeah, God is faithful. And if I was sitting down, I don't actually know who asked this question. I wrote it down a long time ago when somebody asked me in person, and I forget who it was. But if I was, I remember who it was. Okay, so if I was sitting with this person and and had a good relationship with them, I would look at him and say, "Really, bro? You don't want to have more kids because of money?" And then I would say, "You need to leave your phone with me and go see your wife." Go. Que sera, sera, laissez-faire, let the chips fall where they may, and raise your kids and love them. If this was somebody that I didn't know so well, I'd do exactly like you did, and I would say, let's talk about heart condition here because you seem to be valuing dollars over children. I promise you that's not a worthwhile trade in the end.
Yeah. And as far as like surgical stuff and stuff like that, I mean, the only time I can think of, and I even have, I have had some personal experience with this, is that sometimes, like tubal ligation or vasectomies and stuff like that, those would be important for maybe, for example, for the health of mom, right? Let's say, for example, the last pregnancy almost took her life.
I'm not going to knock you for protecting the well-being of your wife. I can't find a biblical category for that.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, wisdom, please exercise it. And God's given us a plethora of it. Mm-hmm. And I hope you're hungry for it because that's the name of the podcast.
I also have a great amount of respect for the people that say, look, this pregnancy might kill me. We're going to do it anyway because we value life.
Certainly.
I think that's a beautiful conviction to have.
Certainly.
So, yeah. There's on the surgical end of things, be really careful with that because that is a one-time decision.
Yep.
In most cases, right?
Yeah.
Don't rush towards that.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yes. Don't rush towards it. It is not permanent. Yeah, that kind of a permanent solution. It is not something. Yeah, okay. Doctors say they can walk it back, but really, just don't. Okay. All right. So,
and when you say don't, you mean not with biblical authority. Don't you mean like, hey, if you decide to do this, you know, this should not be a flippant decision.
I would say, okay, this is where, I would say the flippant decision, like, let's say you're 21, right? And you're like, I want to live footloose and fancy free. Again, heart condition, right? And so I'm going to get this surgery.
I think that's evil.
That's not right.
I think it's evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would, but yeah, just be careful with those kinds of things. Some things you can't walk back from easy. And I just, yeah. Okay. So question number 2. All right. This is from Naphtali.
Oh, this is the one.
Yes. So
this is the one. How many I haven't looked at our numbers on Hungry for Wisdom. I don't know how many subscribers or followers we have. This is where it drops by a third.
Probably.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So Dustin had made a comment before that arranged marriage is a good system, or at least it can be a good system. One question. What the heck? How is this not a throwback to a time when women had no rights and were treated as property?
That did not say what the heck, did it?
No, actually,
no,
I think
cleaning that up.
I think you edited it from
the way the question is written was somewhat different. Yeah. So first off, I did not say that arranged marriage is a good system. I said it's not a crazy system. And I said it's not any worse than what we got going on in our culture.
Oh yeah, because the American system of marriage is so great.
Yeah, we got it figured out, man. Yeah, we marry for love. Like 6 times per person.
Yeah. And we divorce for love? Of someone else?
Love of something, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the deal. So I went to India, and of course, you know, arranged marriage to me, all I ever heard about, or all I ever assumed that it was a dad saying, you know, okay, daughter, you are my property and you will marry the person I decide you will marry, especially if there's economic benefit for me. And so that was my idea of it. Granted, that has happened in many cultures, right? But I got there and I started asking these guys, like, yo, dog, like arranged marriage? Because these are Christian men and women in the church, and I'm talking to Indian Christians, and I'm like, arranged marriage, what is up? Like, what's up? Now, granted, you got to understand my frame of reference here. India has a massive chauvinism problem, right? Like, men sit at the table and eat, and the women stand behind us while we're eating. It's very uncomfortable. They stand behind us while we're eating, and if our plate gets low, they come in and serve us more, and then they eat later, snacking on stuff back in the kitchen. Like, that's how it works there. And that's even in the church, because, you know, that's their culture. And so you see these problems where it's like, man, she does not have full status in this home. I don't dig that. And so I'm sitting there talking to these guys. We're just, you know, we're drinking tea and eating hummus, which I never thought I would enjoy, but they actually figured out a way to pull it off well in this house. And we're just talking about worldview stuff. And so they ask us, you know, about American issues. Like, the first one is, why does everybody in America have a gun? You know, it's like, why do you? I get asked that everywhere I go. Do you own a gun? Like, why does everybody have guns? You know, so in India,
America.
Yeah. Tell me one thing. Why do you need a gun? Why do you need a gun? I'm like, dude. Look. So we always end up getting into that. And so, you know, I fired back and I'm like, well, what about arranged marriage? You know? And so we just had a really good talk, and they started explaining it to me. I was very surprised. And so here's where I wound up with this, was that in arranged marriage, the way that it's done there, what it is that, and by the way, modern day in India, you can marry for love. It's kind of frowned upon culturally because it's not an Indian practice, but nobody's going to get in your way if you marry for love. They see it as a little bit foolish and foolhardy, things like that, but it's not taboo. But arranged marriage there is not the fathers treating the daughters like property, at least not in the group of people that I was talking. I mean, these are Christians. What it was a dad saying, okay, my daughter is of marriage age. My son is of marriage age. I want to make sure that she doesn't wind up with some loser. The family's going to get involved and provide oversight, and has a voice in saying to her, you cannot do this with our blessing. Now, if she runs off and elopes, if the boy takes her off and elopes, that happens all the time, right? But essentially what it is invoking the wisdom of people who are not, 18, in love, horny, and, you know, maybe with a financial benefit. If it's like, oh, he's in medical school, I'm going to have money for the rest of my life. But a dad or a big brother can get involved and say, this dude's a dirtbag. And there's no indication that it's foolish youthfulness. The family does not approve of this marriage. And so it's customary for the fathers to agree on a marriage happening before. So in that sense, it's arranged, right? And usually what'll happen when in small communities, people have known each other for a long time. These dads have known each other since before the kids were born a lot of times. And so they'll get together and say, your daughter and my son were born within 2 years of each other. When they get older, we're going to take a look at this marriage happening. And they can go ahead and, just pull the trigger on that. And, the young man is usually fine with it because he's rip-roaring and ready to go. And the young lady is operating according to cultural norms and honestly usually is more interested in the security of knowing where her food is coming from than in, well, he snorts when he laughs. I don't like him, Yeah. It's like in small communities, you don't hear stuff like that.
Well, and I've even heard, young women saying, wow, that would be great because that takes all the pressure off of trying to find the right guy.
American women have said that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. So, and honestly, I know probably more Christian households, even in America, that would do something similar, maybe a little less authoritative.
Yeah, a little less formal, maybe.
Yeah, a little less formal. But gosh, I mean, I know Christian households where the daughter actually listens to the parents and say they bring the guy.
Yeah.
And the dad sits down with the guy. It doesn't always have to be involving firearms. Sometimes it is. But they sit down and they have a talk.
America.
Yeah, and exactly. Yeah. and they have a talk, and the dad will ask good, pointed questions and maybe get a gauge on this thing.
Thankfully, that's still part of our larger culture. It doesn't always happen, but it's still customary. It seems kind of quaint, but it's very common for a young man to ask her father, now usually it's more like, hey, I'm planning on marrying your daughter. I'd really like your blessing. And which is a little bit different, but even then, there's an opportunity for wisdom to be shared.
Yes.
For that conversation to happen. And that's important.
And I have conversations with my children about their about their boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever, and I'll say, is this person the kind of person that that's going to be, like to my daughter, I'd be saying, is this the kind of person that's going to lead you, then lead you well, right? Is this person for your spiritual benefit, right? And to my sons, it's the same question, right? Is this person to your spiritual benefit? What's going on there? And so that we do this. It's just whether or not it has the authoritative stamp of being arranged.
Right.
There certainly is an awful lot of questions. And honestly, I'm not speaking authoritatively to my children's relationships now. So if you're listening to this podcast, I'm not speaking authoritatively.
This is on the theoretical level.
Yeah. But if there was something amiss, absolutely, I would absolutely speak to it. And if it were really amiss,
you'd get involved.
I'd get involved.
Yeah.
And I remember I did sit down and I didn't get permission to share this story, so I'm going to try and I'll couch it.
You got to code it.
I know of a dad, a friend of a friend, that sat down with a potential future son-in-law.
Does he look like Doug Wilson, this guy?
This guy does kind of look like
He's been
Doug
accused
Wilson,
of it?
just a little bit, yeah. And he just started out saying, look, I recognize that there's a potential here. I'd rather be, knowing that you're a believer, knowing that my daughter's a believer or whatever. I know that there's a potential here that we're going to be seeing an awful lot of each other, especially around potentially kids' birthdays and holidays and things like that. How about we start this on the right foot? I want to be for you and for her, as long as this is what the Lord's will is. And then just start on that foot and then having a great conversation. And that starts this, okay, what's this guy like?
Yeah,
it's a good thing to do, dads, by the way, and I would encourage you to do it.
I think probably mandatory for fulfilling parts of your job, all things being equal.
Yes.
I mean, there were probably exceptions to that where it's impossible. If you're laid up in the hospital or they're in a different country or something, you may not be able to. I don't want to be a legalist, but you're responsible for your daughter and her well-being, right? So,
certainly.
Yeah, and what we're talking about here is, in this case, dad, but parents and then older brothers ought to be doing the same thing. Younger brothers, whatever, uncles, cousins, and all of that. What we're talking about is the family providing a protective mechanism to both parties involved.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and by the way, it does go both ways because, gentlemen, nothing can ruin your life like marrying a crazy chick, right? And girls know girls, and you got to get the family involved. Yeah. And if your sister says to you, dude, this chick's crazy. Like, if you marry her, don't ever, do not register for butcher knives from Bed Bath & Beyond. You're gonna wake up in heaven with some holes in your body, right? Guys know guys, gals know gals. And what you're talking about is a norm where the family's wisdom can speak into a situation for the good of this young couple. Arranged marriage, as I've seen it practice, and what I'm talking about here is that just formalized.
Yeah.
Right? Now,
and maybe a little on steroids, but that's okay.
Maybe a little bit, yeah. Has it been done incorrectly? Oh, yeah. Has it been done abusively? Absolutely. But let me just point out, the alternative is what we got going on here, and that ain't so hot either.
No.
Right? So, like, there is no perfect system because people are involved.
Well, and we do need to avoid the arrogance of thinking our culture is the best and has the best solutions.
And chronological snobbery. These are modern times, man.
Yeah. Because we do have good and plentiful examples of people who had arranged marriages and actually lasted longer.
Whatever happened to Fiddler on the freaking Roof? That's what I want to know. Remember that scene in Fiddler on the Roof where they'd been married forever and it was like, do you love me? And they're like, I never really thought about it. And they got this great marriage with these kids and it's joyful and they laugh and they sing and they pray and, whatever. And it's like, but do you actually love me? And they have this funny moment and there's a song in Fiddler on the Roof where they sing it. And it's like, I really actually do. Like it doesn't change. My feelings in this moment don't actually change what we've built together. But then the last line of the song is, but still, it's nice to know. So here's my question. What happened to love being something that we practice intentionally rather than something that we fall into helplessly and can fall out of just as easily? When we marry for, quote, love, like our version of love, and I'm not talking about biblical love. Yes, I'm ranting. Don't look at me in that tone of voice. When we marry for Western Greco-Roman romantic love, which is a very strong emotion, usually accompanied by like erotic emotions and things like that. We marry for that. You fall into it, you also fall out of it, right? If the heart wants what it wants, there's no guarantee that it's going to want the same thing tomorrow that it wanted 10 years ago when you guys got married. And if that's our guidepost for this, no wonder our marriages fall apart half the freaking time.
Jeremiah 17.
9 and 10, right?
Heart is deceptively wicked. I wouldn't trust that sucker.
Yeah. Who can know it? And in verse 10, God's like, I, the Lord.
Yes, this is true.
Me. And so, that's the thing. Like, love, by a biblical definition, is desiring somebody else's good, even at your own expense.
Yeah.
And if we make that you can make that the foundation for a marriage of somebody you don't know all that well. And go ahead.
I was going to say, absolutely. I think that the idea of marrying only for romantic love is, it's definitely tied to our culture, and it may not. I want to make sure I parse this very carefully, but you can be in a wonderful, biblical, loving relationship with someone that maybe even didn't start with romantic love. It's certainly possible.
Well, and I would say that used to be the norm, right?
Yeah.
So you take a look at, I actually think these guys got it right in a lot of ways. The first century Jews, the practices with like Joseph and Mary, for example, right? It was common for guys of, villages close to each other to meet and then arrange marriages and stuff. It was very, very common. It was, in my understanding, it was the norm for people to marry each other that hadn't really met. And they built a life together. Now, is that potentially volatile? Yeah. If the guy is a jerk, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Right. But the family is right there to smack him in. Remember The Godfather? The husband starts, he like hits the wife and they're fighting and he beats her. The brother shows up and beats him with his own shoe. I love it. Right. But that's the thing, is what we're talking about here with arranged marriages is not women don't have rights. What we're talking about is we're going to protect somebody who's young and doesn't make good decisions when they're in love, because you don't make good decisions when you're in love. And I'm not going to say it's a doomed proposition to begin with. In fact, we all know people, but just to bring up one example, I've got a particular sister that, and I can say that because I got a million of them. So it's like, I got a particular sister that married a guy a very short time after meeting him, and they were in love. So they got married and it could have gone terribly. It turns out he's an awesome guy. They got a great family, whatever. So, it's 50-50 shot when you marry for love. I get the feeling that in a lot of these tight-knit communities, it's more like a 70-30 shot or an 80-20 shot for the good when you do some kind of arranged marriage with healthy practices.
Yeah. So to wrap the question up, I think, one, American system is not necessarily the best system for marriage, and so I don't think that we can necessarily compare. Yes, marrying for romantic love can be a great thing, but I would say not at the expense of wisdom And a lot of cultures dispense wisdom through an arranged marriage, and it may not be arranged like women are property. And I don't think you'd hear anybody at Grace Bible Church on Pleasant Hill or at Grace and Truth Community saying, "Yeah, we should totally treat women like property and trade them like cows and horses." No.
And in the Jewish system, again, the woman had a chance to opt out. I like that.
Yeah.
So maybe we could summarize this way: marrying for love is not enough. You have to have input mechanisms for wisdom in your life. There is a way to arrange marriages in such a way that it accomplishes that.
Yeah. So what the Beatles said, all you need is love.
They were idiots.
Yeah, they also broke up after that.
All you need is a distinct lack of Yoko Ono. Yeah.
All right.
Did you ever hear her album?
I heard that her voice kind of resembled nails on a chalkboard. That's all.
It's more like a duck in a blender. It was it was horrendous, dude.
Okay. Well, yeah. They also say love is blind, and apparently John, yes. Okay, so moving on.
Did you just call Yoko Ono ugly?
I did not.
Yes, you did.
Say that.
You called her a horse face.
Or deaf. Maybe deaf was probably
deaf and ugly. Must have been an arranged marriage because there's no way you'd pick that.
Okay, steering this ship back onto course. Running into question 3. Ooh, here we go.
I don't feel bad about that because they ruined society with the song Imagine.
No, I have no qualms with that. I'll pick on John. Wonderful. It doesn't matter. Okay, so moving on from Teresa. 2-part question, sir. Does God
stretch?
Does God approve of stay-at-home dads? And second question, does God approve of women working outside the home?
I make a motion that we take the second one first. A little simpler, I think.
Okay.
All right. I'll give my standard stock response to this. Women working outside the home. There's the short answer is just make sure you're not taking the husband's God-given job / curse away from him, right? When God handed out curses in the garden, the toil and the provision and the getting food out of the ground, bringing home the bacon, so to speak, that was handed to the man. That was his curse. And so God does not approve of a woman shouldering that burden that he handed to the man. That being said, the woman was also created to be his helpmate. So if you're working outside the home, ladies, I would just say recognize that you're helping the husband carry his load. Just be careful not to take it from him so that he's alleviated of it. That would be contrary to the created order and the I guess you would say divinely cursed order. I don't know. So there's that. On a deeper level, it can be important not to come down too hard on women working outside the home. Now, it can be, they can be neglecting their responsibilities and so on. But one of the things, like the Industrial Revolution caused a lot of problems, right? One of the things it did was it took men outside the home, whereas more often than not, they worked, unless they were a merchant traveling or something, it was mostly agrarian, right? They worked pretty much at home. They were on the ranch doing whatever. Well, the women were there also, and they had a lot of work to do to have the homestead or whatever it was function. And so when men go outside the home and all their work is there, there's no more family business in most cases, and that robbed the women of a lot of meaningful vocation. And so then you've got women who are at home raising kids, most important part of the job, right, of being a stay-at-home mom. The mom part is the most important part. But it's a legitimate question when they throw their hands up and say, okay, what else? Right? Not that something else is more important, not that this isn't fulfilling, but it's not a bad thing to want to sew some stuff, have a loom and make some blankets, whatever. You look at the Proverbs 31 woman and she's making things, trading things. And
she's a real estate agent.
And none of that is happening at the expense of her home duties. So don't take your husband's curse from him. Don't shoulder his burden instead of him. It's fine to help him. And it's a good urge to have productive vocation of some sort. Do not let it happen at the expense of your mothering. Just don't. Absolutely. God does not approve of that.
Yeah, I don't think that you would find. I was thinking through like what Paul said in Titus 2, right? When he says older women are to teach younger women, and that they are to. Okay, so train younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, so that the word of God may not be reviled. Now, there's a number of things going on, right? First of all, what's the reason for all of this? So that the word of God would not be reviled. So whatever might be going on in Titus, which was written to Cretans, right? So there's all kinds of questions about whether or not the word of God is reviled, because Cretans are always liars and evil,
lazy
and,
beasts, and
all of that.
Evil beasts and lazy gluttons.
So
was it
in
Fat
this
sloths.
culture? Obviously, there was something going on. But secondly, is that look? I'm just gonna say it. I think that our sisters, there's a keen, wonderful, God-given thing that happens when their emphasis is on the home.
Yep.
It's amazing. And so to discount that, don't do that, right? Don't discount your value as a life givers and life sustainers. Seriously.
And this goes back to what you said about in the first question about not having more kids because of money and stuff. You brought up the issue of, well, I want to further my career. I promise you, ladies, I haven't lived a long time, but I've lived long enough to see this cycle repeat itself, to see the end of this cycle multiple times. That if you choose your career over your children, you will live and regret the rest of your life. Please don't do that.
Yeah. Yes. And honestly, to the other end of that, when I was in a field where I was looking for to hire people, especially when it came to folks like project managers or administrative folk, I'm looking for women who maybe, for example, who have brought kids through school and through college and all that kind of stuff. It's I want you because you know how to get things done.
Ninjas.
Absolutely. Yeah. So would I say that women can't work outside the home? Absolutely not. I think it's interesting, even as you talk about it, as you mentioned, most homes were family businesses. And so, when it's not that women can't work or produce commerce or anything like that. Absolutely, and in our day and age, that might look a little different. But again, to the neglect of the home and the family and all that kind of jazz, I just don't think that's God's design.
No, it's not. And so we've spent a few minutes here validating the possibility, the theory of a woman having. A married woman having some kind of vocation outside the home. The possibility is not anathema, okay?
Exactly.
That being said, that's not the primary thing that needs to be emphasized in our culture either, right? Because the idolatry goes the other direction. So I do want to emphasize, ladies, be willing to give all of that up for the sake of taking care of your home. Yeah. That's the pathway of blessing from God.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. All right, but that does bring us back to our first question.
Stay-at-home dads?
Stay-at-home dads.
Yeah. I think you and I actually hit this from a different perspective, and we may flat out disagree. I don't know, but why don't you want to do it?
From our first conversation, I think I may have actually adjusted my view.
Yeah,
and it's not.
I don't want to invite you to step into a trap. I'm not trying to trap you. I don't want to talk over you. Go ahead.
I would. There may be a rare, and I will say it's exceedingly rare, where as a husband who wants to lead his home might find that. Okay, I'm going to say this, but I'm not sure if I can actually back it up. So,
Ben and I do this a lot, where we say, "I'm going to say something more sternly than I actually agree with. I'm going to risk overstating this. So don't hold him to every detail of what he says.
In fact, I'm going to overstate it, and then I want you to pick it apart. How about that?
Fair enough.
So, let's say, for example, there's a godly man who understands that in his leadership of the home, that his wife actually has a higher, in order to provide for the home, she actually might be able to provide a higher,
she's got more
higher income, more earning potential, right? So I've known of, for example, I know at least 2 or 3 brothers whose wives are in executive positions in various industries, right? And so they have taken on the responsibility of managing their homes well, and that kind of thing by being involved heavily with the kids and things like that. And their wife is a CEO or in some kind of high income earning portion of that. Mm-hmm. They still run the home. In other words, they're still the leaders of their homes. Right?
The men are?
The men are, absolutely they are. And their wives, I know them, they would submit to their husband and all in all things, right? So they're not saying, well, no, I bring the money, so I get to, make the decisions, right? So I'm saying it's a rare occasion, but I'm and then this is where I had to be careful about my personal experience in informing my input in this question, but I don't think that that's necessarily unbiblical. Okay. Now, if the man has ceded his position as leadership, right, and of the home, right? And if he has seceded that idea because it's just easier for him to just, sit back and, play PlayStation and let the kids watch TV every once in a while, and his wife comes, she brings home the paycheck.
Yeah, if he's lazy, that is manifest sin. No debate. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if and again, this also goes back to that managing of the household, right? And which is a qualification for an elder. If he's managing his household well, and he's understanding where they're going, and there's goals and things like that, and he's managing his home, and the CEO executive wife maybe is that she's providing, that, okay, I might be able to get it, maybe in the sense of like I've heard it used as an analogy of that, that Proverbs 31 woman who's the real estate agent, right? Wheeling and dealing on properties and managing things. Mm-hmm. So in that area, I just would say that would be an exception.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost completely disagree, except that the part of what you said that I agree with is that, it's rare and it's an exception. And so let me reframe it, and then I'll kind of go a different way. So I'll be saying the same thing as you here from a different angle, and then I'll depart. But there's a general norm that God created in the created order, which is stated flat out in the Bible, and I'll get into that in a second, that, no, this is not the way that it's supposed to be. And I do think that there are exceptions to that. I think that the exceptions are based on need, catastrophe, whatever. And so, like, for example, if a dad is staying at home because he's been injured on the job and cannot work for a time, right? Mm-hmm. And so the wife goes out to kind of fill the gap, do whatever. They're making things happen. I don't see anything biblical about that. I don't think we're legalists in the sense of saying, like, no, you either go be the sole breadwinner or you guys are denying Christ.
Yeah, and we're bringing you up on church discipline.
Right. Now, granted, if it's, if, like you said, if he's just being lazy, that's a whole separate issue. And yeah, that's a church discipline issue if there's no repentance, right? But we're not talking about that situation necessarily. I don't know what's behind this question. When somebody said, when Teresa said, does God approve of stay-at-home dads? If he's lazy and he just doesn't want to put pants on, no, God does not approve. Get your butt to work. If you don't provide for your own, you've denied the faith and you're worse than an unbeliever. Get to stepping with that weak sauce. Yeah. But I think that here's where I disagree. The scenario where a woman is a CEO, has a full-time career, but the husband is the head of the house, I've got a real hard time imagining that if the demands of her job disagreed with the husband, that the job would give sustained over a period of time, because it can't, because of the demands of that job. If you can't fulfill the demands of that job, the job goes away, right? If she's got a boss, there's going to be tension there as far as who has claim over her schedule. And maybe they can find a way to navigate that tension in a way where they still have a healthy marriage, but I would not say that is a healthy rubric for marriage. And if there are situations where that has not led to unhealthy interactions between the husband and wife, I would say that is so exceedingly rare that we shouldn't be telling people that that's possible, because it may be miraculous, but it's so far departed from all of human history following the same design in God's word, which is man gets food from the ground and brings it home. Okay. And that's, right from the get-go, even before the creation of Eve, really, you guard the garden and you tend it. Right. And then in the curse, you see more specifically like, hey, you're going to have to get food out of the ground. It's going to hurt. That is your struggle. I'll put it this way. And I think you've heard me say something like this before. If we see an exception to this, we may see a snapshot of it and say, okay, that's not a total catastrophe. That could work. We've never seen it work across generations. And I don't think it can.
Yeah. Like I said, exceedingly rare. And in thinking about it, one of these particular couples, it was really more of a family business, and so the wife just had the management skills to be able to run that business in a way which the husband was like, I like this particular area. I think this is great. This is good profitability for us, but yeah, I can't manage my way out of a paper bag when it comes to understanding business and economics and.
But it was
all
something that
kind
they
of
were
stuff.
engaged in together.
They were engaged in together.
And I would say that's a
So,
significant detail.
yeah.
So let's run a scenario where a guy, they can make really cool farm tables and they sell them and they make money doing it. And they make so much money selling these things on Etsy or whatever that it requires bookkeeping and, IRS knowledge and things like that. The wife has that on lockdown. She's the accountant, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So he says, look, I can crank out a table in 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
So I'm going to work 4 hours a day out there in the garage making a table. And then I'm going to come in and hang with kids after lunch and you're going to go and do paperwork and whatever. I don't think that's necessarily a violation of God's design.
No.
I think that I think it's risky in the sense that she doesn't have that FaceTime with her kids. And so I would be guarded against that, but I would stop short of calling that sinful. In fact, I'd stop way short of calling that sinful. I would say that borders on unwise if it goes a certain direction.
Yeah, and I think that again, if you see, I mean, honestly, if you see if you see the kids and the kids see mom and dad working together as a team, and they understand this is a family, there might be some risk inherent in that. As far as I recognize this as a dad. Sometimes my ability to nurture children is greatly exceeded by my wife to almost their detriment, right? So in all of that, I go, okay, that's fine, right? And the other situation I can think of is a little different, and okay, exception. I know, so yeah, and that's where I've kind of modified a little bit too, because I do think it's important that again is the who gets I don't want to say control, who is exercising authority in the home,
who has final say if there's a disagreement.
Yeah. And I actually do know that in this particular couple, if for example there was something that was something like, for example, from the top down, to say, hey, you got to work more hours or things like that if the husband were saying no, this dear woman would be like, no, I'm out, and
out of the job,
not the marriage, not out of the marriage,
right.
out of the job. So, but again, I think super rare, super far. And honestly, I think to your right, I think that lazy men is probably more.
It's more common
of
for
what's
sure.
probably happening here.
Yeah.
And get off your keister and, get a job.
Yeah. Lose the skirt, dude. Man up.
There we go.
Man up.
All right. Well,
in the name of Christ.
That is all we have.
Can you imagine Jesus coming back on Judgment Day and saying to this man, this lazy schlub, that this Dorito munching slacker, this failure to launch ridden blob of misshapen slime that refuses to do the basic activity of manhood in the home and just burn a calorie and work. This guy. And Jesus comes back and says, what have you done with this wonderful blessing that I have given you of the family? Can you imagine having that conversation with Jesus with a sword coming out of his mouth? Oh. Yeah. Hey, fellas, choose life.
Seriously.
I don't want that for you guys.
Yes.
All right?
Be wise. Oh, rulers of the home.
Do not be wise in your own eyes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, listen, guys, Jesus deserves disciples. So fellas, get off the couch and go be one.
Hungry for Wisdom is a ministry of Grace and Truth Community in West Richland, Washington. You can find out more about us on our app, social media, or at graceandtruthcommunity.com. We love Him because He first loved us.